Hello guys, Jay here. Welcome back to the SEO course. So in this video, what I'll be covering will be on Google properties. Now, Google properties are really important and they are considered to be, in my opinion, they are considered to be part of the foundation and fundamentals. So even before you start going in to create any kind of campaign or you start implementing certain stuff, you need to make sure that these few things that I'll be mentioning later on will be in place first, because these are really important, and you don't want to start any sort of campaign without having all this in place, because these are really important. Okay, so why is it important? First things first, it's with every single kind of campaign that you are running, right? You need to make sure that you have data. So that's the first thing, because you don't want to do any sort of changes or implementations or recommendations if you don't have a base to compare anything with. So that base will be having data. Okay, so that's the first step. That's why you need to have all these Google properties later on that I'll be mentioning about. But you don't just want to have data, you want to have clean data, meaning to say all these data are tracked properly. So for example, if somebody visits your website one time, the properties that you have set up must be able to track that visitor. So if I'm visiting a website the first time, the Google properties need to track one, like me as a visitor, as one session, for example, or one user, right? But you want to make sure that that's the case. You don't want in any case, because of how it's set up, there might be some things that went wrong, and eventually it ends up as, if I go to your website, your Google property register me as 2 users instead of 1. So that's where data kind of gets messy, and you don't want to have that, because the last thing you want to do is you don't want to make any changes or make any recommendations because the data that you have, it's incorrect or inaccurate. So that's why it's really important. You want to have data and you want to have clean data. Okay. And then the next thing, it's the purpose of tracking and monitoring. Now, again, with SEO, you want to know what's working for you and what's not working for you, right? Because you don't want to just implement and not know whether if it works or not. And that's why tracking and monitoring is super important. You need to make sure that you're tracking things on a monthly basis, depending on what your goals are. So ideally for an SEO campaign, organic traffic will be one thing that you look at. Organic goal conversions will be one thing that you look at, but you need to be looking at these. Okay, so that's why it's really important. Now, moving on to some of the Google properties that you'll be seeing again and again while working on SEO. So there is a lot of other Google properties that will not be mentioned here. These Google properties are what you will see on a day-to-day basis if you are working on an SEO campaign. Okay, so these are relevant for SEO. So the first one will be Google Analytics, which is GA. So if you see me referencing GA4, that's Google Analytics. So Google Analytics, as of right now, it's still in play. It's still relevant, but they are going to be rolled out soon. And GA4, you can see here, GA4, this GA4 will be replacing GA in the future. So depending on when you are watching this video, right, GA might be obsolete already, and GA4 might be the one thing that you're dealing with. Okay, so what is Google Analytics? Google Analytics essentially are the eyeballs of your website. Okay, so if you don't have Google Analytics, imagine your website is blind. They cannot see anything. Your website cannot see anything. You cannot see where the traffic is coming from. You cannot see how many traffic there is. You cannot see how many traffic is coming from mobile or tablets, or you're basically blind. Your website is blind. So once you have Google Analytics set up, your website will be able to see. Your website will be able to see the traffic is coming in, the source of the traffic is coming in, or the source of the traffic of where it's coming from. So whether that be organic, whether that be directly, whether that be from social media, and so essentially your website will be able to see. Okay, so that is for Google Analytics. So if you do not have that set up, what you want to do is you want to set that up first. So that's for Google Analytics, right? And then for Google Search Console is also really important. It's this Google Search Console and Google Analytics is probably the two items of the two properties that I interact with on a daily basis, just because of the importance of the data that is within, especially for Google Search Console. So if you do not have Google Search Console, set it up, because Google Search Console kind of functions like the ears of your website. It allows you to know where your website is when somebody is mentioning certain stuff. For example, if somebody is searching for a keyword, where it's your website showing up in the Google results. You know, whether is it on page 1, page 2, page 3. So essentially, if you don't have Google Search Console set up, your website is kind of deaf in a way, because you don't know who is talking about you. You don't know whether your website is showing up for specific keywords. You have no idea of any of that. So Google Analytics are your eyes. Google Search Console, it's your ears, your hearing. Okay, so have it set up, super important. Okay, the next up will be Google Business Property. Now, this used to be called GMB, which is Google My Business. Okay, but it has since changed to Google Business Property right now. They are essentially the same thing. So this is these three items here: Google Business Property and Google Tag Manager and Google Data Studio. It's kind of optional, okay, and I'll explain to you why. So Google Business Property is usually for local businesses. So if you own a local business, for say for example a dentist shop, dental clinic, physiotherapist, a massage, you have a physical location, these will be more important for you, and you need to set that up. So if you don't have that already, you need to set it up. Okay. However, if you have a office, for example, or if you are any kind of brand, right, setting up your Google Business Property, it's always a good thing to have. Irregardless of whether you are a local business. It's just that if you are a local business, then it's more important. It's absolutely required that you set this up. But if you're not a local business, then you can kind of have, it becomes an optional option for you. So for me, I always like to set up Google Business Property, because the more data you feed to Google, the more essentially Google understands what kind of website or business you are. So my opinion is you should always set it up. Now, if you are not a local business, then it's optional for you. You can decide to set it up or not. My recommendation, always set it up. Okay. So next thing will be Google Tag Manager. Now, Google Tag Manager is somewhat of a more advanced Google property that you can interact with. Again, I list this down as optional. And the reason why is because it's slightly more advanced. So if you're a beginner, you're going to jump into things. Google Analytics and Google Search Console will be a lot more friendly for you. Whereby Google Tag Manager, basically it's, how do I put this? It's kind of like a drawer where you can have Google Analytics and Google Search Console, Google Analytics and other kind of Google properties within Google Tag Manager. So it's kind of like, if you have Google Analytics, all of this you should set it up. But Google Tag Manager is kind of like a place where you consolidate all of your data. So you can have, if you have a Google Tag Manager account, you can have, let me see if I can draw this out. So if you have GTM, okay, what you can have is you can have Google Analytics here, and then depending on what kind of other tracking software, like for example, so let me go to my Paint and see if I can draw this out for you guys. Okay, so for example, if you have Google Tag Manager, let's say here you have GTM, right? So what you can do is within Google Tag, and you can see me referencing Google Tag Manager as GTM. So when you have GTM, what is going to allow you to do is, instead of having so many codes on your website, so in order for you to install, in order for you to connect Google Tag Manager to, Google Analytics to your website, you will need to insert a code on your website, okay? And what Google Tag Manager allows you to do is, you will have GA here, you will have any third-party code, for example, or Facebook Pixel. Okay, now it's called Meta Pixel. Okay, but it's essentially using just one code, and within that one code, it serves the same purpose. It captures GA, it captures any third-party tracking code. It have your Meta Pixel, basically any kind of code you'll have within Google Tag Manager. And instead of having all this code on your website, you basically only just have a Google Tag Manager code. Okay, and with Google Tag Manager, it allows you to track more specific stuff, like for example, how many people click on your call to action button, how many people click on your banner, so you are able to track more advanced stuff. Okay, so that's why it's a lot more advanced in a way. So my advice is, if you know Google Analytics and you know how Google Tag Manager works, my advice is always go with Google Tag Manager, because with SEO, page speed is a thing. And obviously, if you load code, the more code that you load on your website, the more resources it will take. So from a page speed perspective, I always choose to have Google Tag Manager, just to have that one code and set everything up in Google Tag Manager. But it's not the easiest thing to do. So if you don't know, if you don't want to go into that, you just want to, get everything set up and then learn SEO, my advice for you is don't learn Google Tag Manager as of now. Just set up Google Analytics and Google Search Console. Okay, and again, this depending on when you're watching this. So when I refer to Google Analytics, it will mean to set up Google Analytics whether GA or GA4. Okay, ideally you set up both, because GA will be phased out pretty soon. Okay, so that is for Google Tag Manager. Now, Google Data Studio, it's basically a place where it allows you to report your data. So instead of going into Google Analytics and just looking at the traffic, and then if you want to look at Google Search Console data, you open up Google Search Console and then you look at the data. Google Data Studio is basically a consolidation of all these metrics, okay, within one platform. So it allows you to report better, or it allows you to see your data better. Okay, and again, this is entirely optional, because like I mentioned, most of the things that you will be looking at will be in Google Analytics, okay, GA or GA4, again, depending on when you're seeing this. Google Search Console, which is what you'll be interacting with almost on a daily basis, okay, and Google Business Property if you have a local business. If not, it's optional. So these three items here are entirely optional, whereas this will be more important, because this is what you'll be looking at on the almost a daily or a weekly basis, at least weekly basis. All right. So what's next is in the next video, I'll be covering, first of all, going through every individual Google property. I will not touch on Google Tag Manager and Google Data Studio, and the reason why is because I think this is more advanced and you don't have to worry about that as of now. So if you have Google Analytics, this GA, GSC, and GBP setup, okay, which is the new name, GPP setup, it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to touch on this four here. Okay, and basically what I'll be doing is I'll be first of all targeting people who already have Google properties set up. So the first things first, it's if you already have a Google property set up, what we're going to do is we're going to have an audit of your Google Analytics to make sure that, first of all, you have clean data, to make sure that your data is clean, okay, and you're tracking and monitoring important stuff. So that's the first part, auditing. The second part will be somewhat of a quick setup. If you don't have it, how to set things up properly. And again, I will think of whether if we want to include you setting it up, or I can do it in one video, because if I can do that, then you don't have to watch two videos, but we'll see how it goes. But basically every individual property will have its own video. So that's what's next. All right, so that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy the future upcoming videos as well. That's all. Cheers. Thanks for watching this. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.